I had worked for U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP) for 5 years. Because my extraordinary sense of smell was a classified asset, Julian always believed I was just a boring, low-level desk clerk. On our third wedding anniversary, I saw my husband at the airport arrivals gate, the same husband who had texted me saying he had to work late. He was gently tucking a strand of hair behind his ex-girlfriend Bianca's ear, smiling with a tenderness he hadn't shown me in years. When he noticed me, he dropped his hand as if nothing had happened, instinctively shielding Bianca behind his back. "Elena, are you tracking me? It's just an anniversary. Would it kill you to spend one night alone? Just say it. What do you want this time to shut up? A designer bag? Shoes? Or is it jewelry?" The surrounding travelers threw disdainful glances at me. It felt like a public slap to my face. I pushed the ultrasound report back into my coat pocket and clenched my trembling fists. "I didn't track you, Julian." Bianca spoke up, her voice sweet and dripping with pity. "Thanks for picking me up, but your wife is more important. Go home and keep her company. And don't be so harsh on her. Apologize." Julian gave me a dry, forced shrug. "Say." I stared at him, my heart sinking. When had the arrogant Julian Cole ever been this obedient to anyone? Bianca patted his shoulder, took her suitcase, and headed toward the customs gate. Suddenly, a strange, toxic odor wafted into my nose. I stepped forward and blocked her path. "Excuse me. Please open your suitcase. CBP inspection." Bianca froze, looking utterly bewildered. Before she could speak, Julian sneered. "Elena, you're taking this drama way too far. Who do you think you are to stop Bianca?" "Julian, your wife seems really mad this time." Bianca smiled bitterly, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the handle of her suitcase. Julian stormed over, grabbed my wrist violently, and dragged me back. "Elena, you're a basic office clerk. Where do you get the nerve to pretend to be a CBP officer?" Bianca lowered her eyes, acting helpless. "Julian, forget it. She's probably just too insecure." "Insecure?" Julian scoffed. "She's just petty and jealous." He glared at me, his veins popping as he suppressed his rage. "Do you even know where Bianca came from? She just flew back from an active epidemic zone. She was out there saving lives in a war-torn country, and what about you? All you care about is discounted purses and spying on me. You are mediocre and selfish. You don't even compare to a single hair on her head." Every word he spat was laced with poison, stabbing straight into my chest. But the concentration of the toxic odor was rising. If this suitcase passed the exit and entered the public area, the consequences would be catastrophic. Seeing that I wouldn't budge, Bianca bit her lower lip. She suddenly gasped and collapsed softly into Julian's arms. "Julian, my hand hurts so much. I think the old injury from the hot zone is acting up." Julian immediately let go of my wrist to hold her tight. His face was filled with sheer panic and worry.
"Bianca,
"Are you okay? Do we need to go to the ER?" He turned to me, his eyes filled with murderous rage. "Elena, if anything happens to her, I will make you pay." "MS. Sterling," I said, ignoring his anger. "Please cooperate and open the suitcase." "Why the hell should she cooperate with you?" Julian stood up, blocking Bianca, looking down at me with pure disgust. "You're in plain clothes, you have no badge and no warrant. What right do you have?" He was right. Today was my day off. I wasn't in uniform, and my ID was locked in the office safe. Seeing my silence, Julian sneered. "Elena, you always do this. You make a scene, and when things get out of hand, you play the victim." The crowd of onlookers grew larger, their whispers echoing like a tide. "Is that woman crazy? What does another person's suitcase have to do with her? She probably lost her mind because her husband's ex-girlfriend came back." Bianca stood up, gently patting Julian's arm. "Don't be mad. Elena is just acting out of jealousy. How about I just open it for her?" Her tone was so graceful and reasonable, making me look like a hysterical shrew. Julian's eyes softened even more. "You don't have to tolerate her." Bianca shook her head with a smile, her fingers reaching for the suitcase's combination lock. But I noticed that while she was spinning the dial, her thumb quickly pressed a small hidden button on the side of the lid. She was releasing something inside. My pupils dilated. I lunged forward and slammed my hand over hers. "Don't touch it." Julian completely snapped. He shoved me hard. I stumbled backward and crashed violently against the metal barricade. A sharp, stabbing pain exploded in my lower abdomen. I doubled over, clutching my stomach as cold sweat instantly drenched my back. Julian didn't even look at me. He put his arm around Bianca's shoulder, picked up the suitcase, and walked toward the exit. "Julian, stop right there." He paused, looking back with an impatient, cold sneer. "Elena, what else do you want? Do you want me to say it in front of everyone? Fine. I regret marrying you. Is that enough? I've regretted it for 3 years." He said those words in a calm, flat voice in front of the entire terminal. I took a step back, unable to believe this was the same man who, 3 years ago, had stood up against his own father just to protect me. On our wedding night, he had handed me his cards and vowed in front of my late mother's photo. He had promised to love and protect me forever. Now, everything had changed. Bianca held Julian's arm, her eyes cast down, but a faint, triumphant smile played on her lips. I had seen that exact smile in the old photos Julian kept hidden in his desk. "Sir." An airport security guard ran over, breathing heavily. "We received a complaint that someone is causing a scene and blocking passengers." Julian immediately pointed at me. "My wife. She's mentally unstable. She saw me talking to a friend and lost her mind." "Ma'am, please do not obstruct other passengers," the guard said, turning to me. I forced myself to stand straight despite the agonizing pain, my palms soaked in cold sweat. "I have probable cause to believe that suitcase contains biohazardous contraband. Please assist me in detaining her." The guard frowned. "Do you have credentials?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Julian mocked from the side. "She's a basic desk clerk earning minimum wage. What credentials could she possibly have?" Bianca spoke up at the perfect moment, her voice sweet and harmless. "I'm a member of Doctors Without Borders. I just returned from West Africa. The suitcase only contains my personal belongings and medical journals. This lady must have misunderstood." She pulled out an ID card from her purse and handed it to the guard. The guard took a look, and his expression instantly relaxed. "Since you have official credentials, ma'am, please step aside." "The ID is fake," I said. The terminal fell dead silent for a second, followed by even louder laughter from the crowd. "Oh, now she claims it's fake. Why don't you show us a real one then? Is this woman so jealous she's losing her mind? Her husband literally said she's crazy. Poor guy, marrying a psychopath." Julian's face turned completely black. He strode over to me, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "Bianca and I are clean. Stop your disgusting accusations. Elena, leave with me right now, and I might give you one last chance." I didn't budge. "You're not leaving?" He grabbed my arm, trying to drag me away. "Julian, don't touch me. I'm pregnant." "Playing this card again?" His voice was filled with sheer disgust. "Last time we had a fight over my student, you faked a migraine to go to the hospital. Now you're pregnant? If you were really pregnant, you'd be resting at home instead of throwing a tantrum at the airport." Bianca stood nearby, one hand on the suitcase handle, her other hand searching for something inside her purse. The suitcase was about to pass the security gate. I ignored Julian, pushed past him, and rushed toward the wall 3 meters away. There was a red button under a protective plastic cover with a label that read, "Level 1 Biohazard Alert." I flipped the cover open and slammed my palm down. An ear-splitting alarm instantly blared through the entire terminal. Red warning lights flashed frantically. The noisy crowd silenced for a few seconds before erupting into a massive panic.
Bianca froze.
Her hand stopped inside her purse, her fingers trembling. Julian, seeing that I had actually triggered the alarm, rushed over in a fury. He raised his hand high, the wind from his palm brushing my face. He looked ready to slap me, but his hand stopped in midair. Not because he spared me, but because everyone was watching. As a self-righteous university professor, his reputation couldn't afford the scandal of hitting a woman in public. Instead, he poked my forehead hard, pushing my head back. "Do you know what the penalty for a false alarm is?"
Jail. Finis.
"You don't care about your reputation, but I care about mine. You're just a clerk. What right do you have to press that button? Do you even know what it means?" He really didn't know. He had never cared about my job, nor had he ever asked what I actually did. Every time I worked overtime, he would only say, "What's so busy about a trash job?" For 3 years, in his eyes, I was just a useless, dependent ornament he had to support. "Make way. Clear the area." A hazmat team in full protective gear rushed out from the side corridor, pushing a sealed containment cart. The security captain ran at the front, his radio buzzing. Level 1 triggered in Zone A3.
No visible leak.
Requesting immediate backup. Bianca stood stiffly by the gate, her suitcase locked behind the emergency barrier. Her panic lasted less than a second before she regained her composure. She even offered a warm, polite smile to the hazmat team. "Officer, I am a registered physician with the International Red Cross. This woman is having a domestic dispute with her husband." She falsely triggered the alarm just to harass me. The supervisor looked at her documents, then at me. Pale, in plain clothes, and looking exhausted. He was clearly swayed by her credentials. He turned to me with a stern face. "Ma'am, this is a federal customs area, not a place for you to settle your marriage problems." Julian turned to the hazmat captain, put on his elegant professor persona, and apologized. "Officer, I am so sorry. My wife has been emotionally unstable lately. She probably did this because we had a fight. We are incredibly sorry for the trouble. This is all just a big misunderstanding. This woman is out of her mind. She literally claimed someone was carrying a bioweapon. Now we're all stuck here. I feel so bad for the doctor. She went abroad to save lives, only to come back and deal with this psycho. If I were him, I would have divorced her a long time ago. She deserves a good beating." Listening to their words, my nails dug deep into my palms. The hazmat team was following protocol, but they needed my federal ID number to bypass standard procedures and initiate a forced search. But my phone had been smashed when Julian pushed me earlier. Without my phone, I couldn't reach my supervisor. Without my ID, the hazmat team wouldn't authorize the search. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. If you kneel down right now, apologize to Bianca, and admit you did this just to get my attention, I might consider using my status as a professor to bail you out of the police station. Kneel down. Apologize to Bianca. I looked at the face of the man I had loved for 3 years, and for the first time, he felt like an utter stranger. Julian. My voice was quiet but steady. I gave you your last chance to walk away from her. Are you threatening me? He scoffed, his eyes filled with contempt. It's not a threat. I looked straight into his eyes. From this moment on, you will bear the full legal consequences of your choices. Hearing this, Bianca's eyes flashed with impatience. With a click, she spun the dial, unlocked the suitcase, and flung it open in front of everyone. Since you want to see it so badly, look. Everyone, please be my witness. If they don't find any contraband, I will make sure she rots in jail. Bianca's suitcase lay open on the clean tiled floor. Inside, there were only a few ordinary clothes. In the corner, there were a few designer makeup cases and a thick stack of handwritten medical notes in English. The crowd burst into laughter. That's it? A biohazard? She really is insane. What a drama queen. It's just normal luggage, and she tried to frame her. How vicious. This crazy woman should be locked up. Julian, eager to end this and leave with Bianca, turned to the airport security. Don't waste your time. Just take her away. My wife is sick. She has a hereditary mental illness. He pointed at his head, his face filled with disgust. Those words were like a rusted dagger plunging straight into my heart. Years ago, when my father cheated on my mother, he had publicly accused her of being mentally ill. He drove my mother to despair, leading her to jump from the 18th floor of our apartment building. That was the deepest, bleeding wound in my heart. Julian knew everything. Yet, to protect his ex-girlfriend, he didn't hesitate to stab me right where it hurt the most. Look at you, hysterical and pathetic. How are you any different from your mother, who jumped off that building? Equally crazy, equally unreasonable. The whispers around us changed. The mockery turned into fear. Several bystanders stepped back, as if afraid I would suddenly lose my mind and attack them. A mother pulled her child behind her. Where are the guards? Get her out of here before she hurts someone. The security guards exchanged glances and began to surround me. I am not crazy. And my mother wasn't either. I whispered, my voice trembling, but I forced every word out clearly. But no one listened. Someone shoved me roughly, trying to drag me away. Get her out of here. Stop her from ruining the airport. In the chaos, I was pushed to the cold floor. A warm, thick liquid began to trickle down my inner thighs. I grabbed Julian's pant leg, my voice shaking with terror. Julian, I'm really pregnant. Please. Julian didn't bend down to help me. Instead, he kicked my hand away with disgust. Elena, even if you are pregnant, he paused, his lips curling into a cruel sneer. I wouldn't want his child anyway. Who knows what ticking time bomb is buried in your family's genes? I don't want to raise a kid who's destined to jump off a building. Let's go, Bianca. You just got back. Let me take you out for a nice dinner. Where do you want to go? People were laughing. Some were filming with their phones. I lay on the freezing floor, feeling my life slowly draining away. Get up, ma'am. Stop making a scene. The guards pulled me up. My knees were weak, and my vision began to turn black. Bianca picked up her suitcase and took 2 steps toward the exit.
Bang!
The heavy glass doors were kicked open. Black tactical shields rushed into the terminal, followed by a squad of fully armed CBP special agents. Their rifles immediately locked onto every moving target near the exit. Everyone froze. Bianca's hand went stiff on the suitcase handle. Julian's face turned from arrogant contempt to shock, then to absolute terror. Aiden Brooks, wearing black tactical gear, rushed over to me. When he saw my pale face and the blood on my legs, his pupils shrunk. I pointed weakly at Bianca's suitcase. The suitcase, the makeup powder cases, the hidden compartment. Elena, you're bleeding. It's a miscarriage. Aiden wrapped his tactical jacket around me and lifted me into his arms, his voice deep and urgent. Call an ambulance.
Now.
His men immediately responded on their radios. As Aiden carried me toward the exit, his eyes swept over Bianca and the suitcase. He threw out 2 words. Search it. Thoroughly. Julian finally snapped out of his shock and tried to block him. On what authority? She is our senior customs consultant, executing federal duties when she triggered the alarm. That is our authority, Aiden said, his voice cold as ice. Obstruct us again, and you'll be arrested for federal obstruction of justice. Julian froze, unable to move a muscle as he watched Aiden carry me out of the terminal. In the ambulance, the paramedic tried to stop the bleeding. I clutched Aiden's wrist, my voice barely a whisper. The powder cases, the hidden layer, it smells like blood. I know. We received the intel. Stop talking, save your strength. Aiden pressed his hand over mine, his warm palm transferring heat to my cold skin. The ambulance is almost at the hospital. Hang in there. I looked at the swaying Ford drip above me, my vision blurring. Julian, does he? We will find out if he was involved. Aiden's voice was incredibly steady. Don't think about him right now. Just focus on yourself. Before I lost consciousness, my last thought was, asterisk, thank God I pressed that alarm. Thank God she didn't get that suitcase out. Asterisk. Back in the terminal, Bianca was whispering in disbelief. No. How could she smell it? Her voice was hoarse and broken. She took a step back, then another, until she hit the tactical shield of an agent. 2 agents immediately grabbed her arms, pinning her to the floor. She screamed in panic. You made a mistake. Those are just cosmetic research samples. I have transport permits. Take her in for interrogation. When I woke up in the hospital, the sharp smell of disinfectant filled my nose. I moved my fingers and Aiden immediately sat up from the chair beside my bed. You're awake? How do you feel? I'll call the doctor. I pulled on his sleeve, my throat burning. He quickly turned around, poured a cup of warm water, and helped me sit up to drink it. The warmth spread down my throat. Only then did I ask in a hoarse voice, the baby? Aiden's hand paused. His eyes softened with deep regret.
I'm sorry, Elena.
You lost too much blood. The doctor said the fetus was already too weak. I had already guessed the outcome, but hearing it still felt like a physical blow to my chest. I turned my face away, wiping my tears, and asked, what about Bianca? She confessed. She was paid $500,000 by a hostile foreign organization to smuggle a deadly pathogen. She was planning to release it in a highly populated area. Aiden paused. Julian knew nothing about the pathogen. He was just a fool who went to pick her up. He's been waiting outside the room. He says he wants to see you. Get me a lawyer, I said coldly. I want a divorce. The hospital room was exceptionally quiet, save for the rhythmic, low hum of the heart monitor. Outside the window, a gray drizzle washed over the city, matching the cold, hollow ache in Elena's lower abdomen. She stared at the ceiling. The physical pain was a dull, throbbing presence, but the emotional void was vast. The child she had only just discovered she was carrying, the one she had hoped might somehow mend the fractured pieces of her life, was gone. Aiden Brooks sat quietly in the plastic chair beside her bed. He hadn't left since they arrived. He had discarded his heavy tactical vest, leaving him in a dark, form-fitting combat shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms mapped with faint scars from years in the field. He was peeling an apple with a small pocket knife, his movements precise and deliberate. You don't have to stay, Aiden, Elena said, her voice dry and barely louder than a whisper. The operation is over. Bianca is in custody. You have a mountain of paperwork waiting for you at the sector headquarters. Aiden didn't look up immediately. He finished carving a clean, thin slice of the apple, placed it on a small ceramic plate on her bedside table, and wiped the blade on a napkin before folding the knife. The paperwork can wait, he said, his voice deep and steady. And the operation isn't entirely over. The Department of Justice is taking over the prosecution of
Bianca Sterling.
But my primary concern right now is my senior consultant.
He
finally looked at her, his dark eyes carrying a quiet, fierce intensity.
You
almost died, Elena. If we had been 5 minutes later. He didn't finish the sentence, but the muscle jaw in his jaw clenched. Elena closed her eyes. She could still smell it, not the sterile antiseptic of the hospital, but the lingering memory of that toxic, metallic scent from the airport terminal. It was Ricinus communis derivative, laced with a synthetic binding agent designed to make it highly aerosolized, a weaponized biological agent. Bianca had been carrying enough of it in the false bottoms of those cosmetic cases to contaminate an entire subway system, and Julian had called her crazy for trying to stop it. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. The door opened slightly, and Dr. Evans, a middle-aged OBGYN with a tired but compassionate face, stepped in. She looked at the chart in her hands, then at Elena. How is the pain level, Elena? She asked gently.
Manageable, Elena Leet.
The cramping was severe, but she was used to enduring. Dr. Evans sighed softly, stepping closer to the bed. The physical healing will take a few weeks. We performed a minor procedure to ensure there was no remaining tissue or infection. Your blood counts are stabilizing, but you need absolute rest. No stress, no work, and certainly no physical exertion. She hesitated, looking briefly at Aiden before turning back to Elena. Regarding the miscarriage, the physical trauma from the fall, and the subsequent shock were the primary triggers. I've documented the bruises on your wrist and your lower back. The federal marshals have already requested those medical records. Thank you, Doctor, Elena whispered. As Dr. Evans left, the heavy door hadn't fully swung shut before a commotion arose in the hallway. I am her husband. You have no right to keep me out of her room. The voice was unmistakable. It was Julian. Gone was the cool, academic arrogance. he usually projected. Instead, his voice was frayed, high-pitched and laced with panic. "Sir, you need to step back. This is a restricted ward. A hospital security." Guard replied, his voice firm. "I don't care."
Elena.
"Elena, I know you're in there," Julian shouted. "Tell them to let me in. We need to talk." Elena's hand gripped the thin hospital blanket. Her knuckles turned white. Aiden stood up slowly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees.
Do you
"Want me to handle him?" he asked, his tone flat, devoid of any warmth. Elena looked at her hands. For 3 years, she had shrunk herself to fit into the margins of Julian's life. She had tolerated his coldness, his intellectual snobbery, his subtle emotional abuse, and finally, his blatant betrayal with Bianca. She had done it because she thought she was protecting something.
But
There was nothing left to protect. "No," Elena said, her voice hardening. "Let him in. But stay, Aiden. I want a witness." Aiden nodded once. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the corridor. Within seconds, Julian practically stumbled into the room. He looked disheveled. His expensive tweed jacket was wrinkled, his hair was messy, and his glasses were slightly crooked on his nose. The confident, condescending university professor who had looked down on her at the airport was
gone.
in his place was a man who looked thoroughly terrified. When he saw Elena lying in the bed, pale and hooked up to an his eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and desperation. But then his gaze shifted to Aiden, who stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, watching him like a predator marking its prey. "Elena." Julian started, taking a step toward her. "Thank God you're awake. The police, the federal agents, they've been questioning me for 6 hours. They think I was involved with Bianca. They think I helped her." He reached out to grab her hand, but Elena pulled her arm away, hiding her hand beneath the blanket. The rejection was quiet, but absolute. Julian's hand hovered in the air for a second before he dropped it, his face twisting into a look of hurt. "Elena, please. You have to tell them the truth. Tell them I had no idea what Bianca was doing. I thought she was just coming back from a humanitarian mission. I didn't know anything about whatever was in that suitcase." "Is that why you're here, Julian?" Elena asked, her voice chillingly calm.
To
"Protect your career?"
no.
"Of course not," Julian stammered, though his eyes darted nervously.
I
"Mean, yes, the university is already asking questions. Someone leaked a video of the airport incident online. It's a disaster, Elena. My tenure track is on the line. But I'm here because of us. Because of what happened." He looked at her stomach, his expression softening into what he likely thought was a look of deep sorrow. "The doctor told me about the baby. Elena, I'm so
sorry.
I didn't know you were actually pregnant. I thought you were just you. Know how you get when you're stressed. You make things up to get my attention." Aiden took a single step forward. The floorboards didn't creak, but the sheer physical presence of the agent made Julian flinch and step back. "Watch your words, Professor," Aiden said, his voice dangerously low. "You are in a federal custody environment adjacent. Your next sentence could very well determine whether you leave this room in handcuffs." Julian swallowed hard, his collar suddenly looking too tight. He turned back to Elena, trying to ignore Aiden. "Elena, please. We've been married for 3
years.
We built a life together. Yes, I made mistakes. I shouldn't have brought Bianca back, and I shouldn't have said those things at the airport. I was frustrated. I was under so much pressure at the university, and you were always so busy with your desk job." He let out a shaky breath, attempting a familiar, reassuring smile. "But we can get through this. We can hire the best doctors. We can try again for another baby. Once this misunderstanding with Bianca is cleared up, everything can go back to normal. I'll even help you find a better job, something less stressful, so you don't have to deal with all of this." Elena looked at him, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no love, no sorrow. Just a profound sense of disgust. "Misunderstanding." Elena repeated the words slowly. She was carrying weaponized ricin toxin, Julian. If that suitcase had opened fully, hundreds of people in that terminal would have suffered agonizing deaths within hours. Including you. Including me. Julian paled. I didn't know." "And the baby?" Elena's voice cracked slightly, the only sign of the storm raging inside her. "You kicked my hand away. You told me you didn't want a child who was destined to jump off a building. You insulted my mother. You called her crazy, just like your father did to yours." "I was angry," Julian cried, his voice rising in desperation. "I didn't mean it. You have to understand the context, Elena. There is no context that justifies what you did." Elena cut him off, her tone dropping to a dead, icy whisper. "The baby is gone. And so am I." She reached under her pillow and pulled out a manila envelope. She had asked Aiden to have one of the agency's legal liaisons draft the documents hours ago. She threw them onto the bedside table. Divorce papers, Elena said. Sign them. Julian stared at the papers as if they were a coiled snake. Divorce?
Elena,
Don't be ridiculous. You can't divorce me over one fight.
you don't even have a
Proper income without me. How are you going to afford an apartment?
How are you?
Going to live. He was still convinced she was a low-level desk clerk earning minimum wage. Elena looked at Aiden, who nodded. Aiden stepped forward and drew a leather-bound credential wallet from his pocket, flipping it open. Beside it, he placed a silver federal badge. Elena Sterling is not a desk clerk, Mr. Cole, Aiden said, using Julian's civilian title with cold precision. She is the lead biochemical profiler and senior customs consultant for the Department of Homeland Security, assigned to the CBP's Special Tactical Elite Unit. Her security clearance is several levels higher than your university president's. Julian's eyes went wide. He looked at the badge, then at Aiden, and finally at
Elena, what? No.
That's impossible. She works in an administrative
Pool.
I've seen her paychecks. You saw the dummy paychecks the agency routes to civilian-facing accounts to maintain her cover, Aiden explained, his voice dripping with professional disdain. Her actual compensation is handled through a classified federal treasury account. She earns more in a quarter than you do in an academic year, Professor. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The foundation of his superiority, the belief that he was the brilliant intellectual provider and she was the simple, dependent wife, shattered into 1,000 pieces right in front of him. You never care to ask what I actually did, Julian, Elena said, her voice filled with a quiet, devastating pity. You were too busy looking down on me. You wanted a wife who made you feel big because you felt so small everywhere else. She pointed at the divorce papers again. Sign them, or my lawyers will drag you through a public deposition that will ensure you never teach at a university again. And that's before the FBI finishes investigating your financial ties to Bianca Sterling. I don't have any financial ties to her, Julian yelled, panic taking over. We'll let the forensic accountants decide that, Aiden said. Now sign the papers and get out of this room. If I see you within 50 yards of her again, I will personally have you detained under the Public Safety Act. Julian's hands shook as he picked up the pen from the bedside table. He looked at Elena, searching her face for any trace of the woman who used to cook his meals, fold his laundry, and accept his criticisms with a quiet sigh. He found only a stranger with eyes as cold as flint. With trembling fingers, he signed the papers, his signature messy and fractured. He threw the pen down, his chest heaving. You'll regret this, Elena, he hissed, trying to salvage some shred of his shattered pride. You think you're some big federal agent now? You're still the girl whose mother jumped off a building. You're still broken. Before Aiden could move, Elena spoke. Her voice was steady, clear, and utterly devoid of fear. My mother jumped because she was driven to despair by a cruel, narcissistic man who gaslit her until she couldn't tell what was real anymore, just like you tried to do to me. She looked him dead in the eye. But I am not my mother.
Julian.
I survived you. Julian stared at her, his face turning a deep, angry red. But under Aiden's silent, menacing glare, he couldn't find any more words. He grabbed his coat, turned on his heel, and practically fled the room, slamming the door behind him. The silence returned, heavier this time, but the air felt cleaner. Elena closed her eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't sob. Aiden walked back to the chair, picked up the apple slice, and offered it to her. Eat, he said softly. You need your strength. Elena took the slice, her fingers brushing against his. His hand was warm, solid, and real. Thank you, Aiden, she whispered. Always, he replied. 2 weeks later, the physical wounds had begun to scab over, but the investigation into Bianca Sterling's network was only heating up. Elena sat in a secured briefing room at the CBP sector headquarters. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of several large flat-screen monitors, displaying tactical maps, financial transaction records, and surveillance footage. Her desk was covered in small glass vials containing synthetic scent compounds. To anyone else, they were just chemical mixtures. To Elena, whose olfactory receptors were genetically anomalous, a trait the government had spent millions of dollars testing and training, each vial was a detailed story. She picked up a small vial labeled sample B14. She unscrewed the cap held at a few inches from her nose and inhaled gently. It's the same, she said, her voice carrying a gravelly tone from her recent recovery. The binder is a synthetic polymer, but there's a trace of petroleum-based solvent. It's cheap, industrial grade. This wasn't manufactured in a high-tech state laboratory. It was cooked in a makeshift facility, likely in the coastal regions of West Africa, near the oil refineries. Aiden, standing behind her with his hands on the back of her chair, nodded to the analyst sitting at the console. The analyst quickly typed in the parameters, narrowing down the satellite search map of West Africa. Bianca Sterling's travel records show she spent 3 months in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, before flying to Monrovia, Liberia, Aiden said. She claimed she was working in a refugee clinic, but our local intelligence suggests she spent most of her time in an abandoned industrial park near the Delta. She wasn't working alone, Elena said, her brow furrowing as she looked at the financial charts on the screen. An operation like this requires cold chain logistics. Weaponized ricin is highly sensitive to temperature. If it gets too warm, the protein denatures and becomes useless. Bianca's suitcase had a battery-powered cooling system built into the lining.
Who bought the
Components. The analyst brought up a series of shell company transactions. The purchases for the specialized microcompressors were traced back to a logistics firm, registered in Delaware. The primary shareholder is a holding company based in Zurich. And who signed the import manifests for the local delivery? Elena asked, a strange gut feeling tightening her chest. The analyst tapped a few keys, bringing up a scan document. Elena's breath hitched. At the bottom of the manifest, listed as the academic liaison for educational material imports, was a signature. Julian Cole. The room went dead silent. Aiden's face darkened. He told the interrogators he didn't know anything about the suitcase. He didn't, Elena said, her voice quiet but certain. She rubbed her temples, remembering the scent she had detected on Julian's jacket weeks ago when he came to the hospital. Julian is arrogant, but he's a coward. He wouldn't have the nerve to knowingly participate in a bioterrorism plot. But Bianca knows exactly how to play him. She stood up, walking closer to the screen. Look at the dates. Julian signed these manifests 3 months ago, right around the time he started asking me about my clerical schedule and whether the CBP ever audited educational shipments at the regional airports. I thought he was just being his usual condescending self, mocking my job. But he was gathering information for her. He was her useful idiot, Aiden muttered, his eyes cold. She used his academic credentials to bypass standard cargo screening protocols for research samples. And his pride made him the perfect shield. Is it enough to indict him? Elena asked. As an accessory to federal bioterrorism? Absolutely, Aiden said. Even if he didn't know the exact nature of the payload, his gross negligence and active obstruction of a federal officer at the terminal, which led to the injury of that officer, are more than enough to put him away for 20 years. Elena felt a cold sensation of justice settling in her bones. Julian had spent years trying to make her feel small, trying to convince her that she was nothing without him. Now, his own arrogance was the very shovel he had used to dig his own grave. Where is he now? She asked. The university placed him on administrative leave last week after the video of the airport incident went viral. Aiden replied, pulling up a local surveillance feed. He's holed up in his apartment. He's tried calling your phone 84 times, but we've blocked the routing. He's desperate, Elena. He knows the net is closing. Let's go, Elena said, reaching for her tactical jacket. Aiden caught her arm gently. His grip was warm, but firm. Elena, you're still recovering. You don't need to be there for the arrest. We can handle this. Elena looked at his hand on her arm, then up into his eyes. There was a deep, unspoken protectiveness in his gaze, but also a profound respect. I need to be there, Aiden, she said softly. I need him to see me when the door closes. I need him to know exactly who took him down. Aiden stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, his lips curved into a faint, rare smile. All right, get your gear. Julian Cole's apartment was a mess. Books, research papers, and empty wine bottles littered the mahogany coffee table that Elena used to polish every Sunday. The air was thick with the smell of stale takeout, cheap whiskey, and sweat, a sharp contrast to the clean, lavender-scented home Elena had maintained for 3 years. Julian paced the floor, his shirt untucked, his eyes bloodshot. On his laptop screen, the homepage of the university forum was open. The headline read, Department of Sociology Professor Suspended Pending Federal Investigation. The comment section was a bloodbath. Students he had once failed for minor formatting errors were now openly mocking him. Colleagues who had once nodded politely at his lectures were releasing statements distancing themselves from his unprofessional and potentially criminal conduct. His phone buzzed on the table. He lunged for it, hoping it was his lawyer, or perhaps Elena finally calling him back to say it was all a bad dream. It was an unknown number. He swiped to answer. Hello? Is this Mr. Sterling's office? I need to speak to Julian Cole. The voice on the other end was cold, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. Who is this? Julian demanded, his voice cracking. This is Special Agent Aiden Brooks, Department of Homeland Security. We are outside your building. You need to unlock your front door and step out into the hallway with your hands visible. Julian's heart leaped into his throat. He ran to the window and parted the heavy drapes. On the street below, 3 black tactical SUVs were parked, blocking the entrance to his building. Several heavily armed agents in black gear, tactical helmets, and body armor were already securing the perimeter. Neighbors were standing on their balconies, filming the scene with their phones. No, wait. Julian panicked, his voice rising to a shriek. There's been a mistake. I'm a tenured professor. I have an appointment with the dean tomorrow. You can't do this. You have 30 seconds to comply, Mr. Cole, the voice on the phone said. After that, we will breach the door. The line went dead. Julian spun around in circles, his mind racing. He thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. He thought about calling his father, but his father had already refused to take his calls after the airport video went viral, calling him an embarrassment to the family name.
Elena.
She was behind this. It had to be her. She was using her position to punish him, because he had chosen Bianca over her. She's doing this out of jealousy. Julian muttered to himself, his fear turning into a manic, desperate rage. She's just a spiteful, bitter woman. She's trying to ruin me because I didn't want her. He marched to the front door, his chest heaving. He was going to set them straight. He was going to explain to the agents that Elena was a manipulative, mentally unstable woman who was abusing her authority to settle a domestic dispute. He unlocked the door and flung it open. Listen to me, Julian yelled as he stepped into the hallway. This is a gross abuse of power. My wife is. He froze. Standing in the hallway, flanked by 4 fully armed tactical agents, was Elena. She wasn't wearing her hospital gown anymore. She was dressed in a sleek, dark, blue CBP tactical uniform, her hair pulled back into a tight, professional bun. A silver federal badge was pinned to her chest, catching the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. Beside her stood Aiden Brooks, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. Elena looked at him. Her face was a mask of absolute, unyielding authority. Julian Cole, she said, her voice echoing clearly down the corridor. Under Title 18 United States Code, Section 2332A, you are being placed under arrest for conspiracy to transport chemical weapons, material support to a terrorist organization, and federal obstruction of justice. Elena, stop this. Julian pleaded, taking a step forward, but 2 agents immediately raised their rifles, their red laser sights dotting his chest. He stopped instantly, his hands flying into the air. Are you insane? I'm your husband. You're doing this because of Bianca? Because of the baby? I told you I was sorry. You're not sorry, Julian, Elena said, her voice quiet but piercing. You're just caught. I didn't know. Julian screamed, tears of panic finally spilling over his cheeks. I didn't know what was in the suitcase. She told me it was medical research. She told me she needed my help to bypass the customs bureaucracy because the local officials were corrupt. I did it for her research. And you did it for your own ego, Elena added. You wanted to play the hero for
Bianca.
You wanted to feel like a powerful man of science while you treated me like a nuisance. You signed federal customs declarations under your academic credential, certifying that the cargo was non-hazardous. You lied on federal documents. That's a misdemeanor.
Julian leaned desperately.
It's just administrative paperwork. Not when the cargo is weaponized ricin. Aiden spoke up, his voice cutting through Julian's excuses like a knife. That makes it a Class A felony with a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. No parole. Julian's knees buckled. He sank to his knees on the carpeted floor of the hallway, looking up at Elena with a face pale with terror. Elena, please. Please don't do this to me, he sobbed, his dignity completely
Disintegrating.
I won't survive in prison.
You know me.
I'm an intellectual.
I'm fragile.
Please, for the sake of our 3 years together.
For the
sake of the love we had. The love I had. Elena corrected him. You never loved me, Julian. You loved the control you had over me. You loved having a wife who would quietly endure your contempt so you could feel superior. She stepped closer to him, looking down at his kneeling form. Do you remember what you told me at the airport, Julian? When I was on the floor bleeding, begging you to help me? Julian swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear, unable to speak. You told me I was hysterical. You told me you wouldn't want my child anyway, because of my family's genes. You told me I was destined to end up like my mother. Elena leaned down slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. My mother died because she believed the lies of a man who looked exactly like you. But I didn't believe yours. And now you are going to spend the next 2 decades in a concrete cell, realizing that the mediocre, low-level clerk you despised was the one who put you there. She stood up straight, turning her back on him. Take him away, she ordered.
Elena.
No. Elena, please. Julian screamed as 2 agents grabbed his arms, pulling him to his feet and twisting his hands behind his back to snap the heavy zip ties around his wrists. You can't do this.
I'm Julian Kolle. I'm a
Professor.
Elena.
He struggled, his glasses falling off his face and crushing under the heavy boot of an agent as they dragged him down the hallway toward the elevator. His cries echoed through the building, desperate, pathetic, and ultimately futile. Elena stood in the empty hallway, watching the elevator doors close. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest for 3 years finally lifted, replaced by a cool, clean breeze of absolute closure. Aiden walked up beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder.
You.
All right. Elena turned to him, a genuine, soft smile finally touching her lips.
Evan.
Never been better, Aiden. With Julian Cole's arrest, the domestic chapter of Elena's nightmare was closed. But the professional threat remained. The Department of Homeland Security had established a temporary command center at a secured military airfield just outside the city. The threat level had been elevated to orange. Bianca Sterling's arrest had fractured the smuggling cell, but the intelligence recovered from her phone suggested that a second, larger shipment of the pathogen had already entered the country through a different port of entry. Elena sat in front of a high-tech ventilation hood inside the mobile biohazard laboratory. She wore a full positive pressure protective suit, her breathing echoing softly inside the plastic helmet. In front of her, under the glass shield, was a small, sealed container containing a residue sample taken from Bianca's false bottom suitcase. Using a remote manipulator arm, Elena opened the container. Through her specialized training, she had learned to translate her acute sense of smell into a precise analytical tool, isolating individual chemical compounds within complex mixtures. Even through the filters of her protective suit's analytical port, which allowed controlled, microscopic vapor samples to reach her sensory array safely, she could detect the chemical fingerprint. She closed her eyes, focusing entirely on the scent. It's different, she said into her collar microphone. In the observation room behind the reinforced glass, Aiden and a team of CDC scientists listened intently. Different how, Elena? Aiden asked through the comms. The sample from Bianca's suitcase had a synthetic polymer binder, Elena explained, her mind mapping the scent profile. But this residue, there's an organic impurity. It smells of dried river silt, decaying vegetation, and eucalyptus. High concentration of eucalyptus oil. One of the CDC scientists leaned forward to his microphone. Eucalyptus oil is often used in crude laboratory setups in Southeast Asia and parts of East Africa as a masking agent to hide the smell of organic decay during the ricin extraction process. It's also used to keep insects away from the raw mash. No, Elena said, shaking her head inside her helmet. It's not just a masking agent. It's a specific regional variety, Eucalyptus globulus. It has a higher cineol content. It's sweet, almost medicinal, but with a heavy, greasy undertone. She opened her eyes, staring at the chemical analysis screen. This shipment didn't come from West Africa. The raw materials were processed in a region where this specific eucalyptus grows near major transport hubs. Look at the shipping logs for the last 48 hours. We're looking for a cargo vessel that originated from the East African coast, specifically the port of Mombasa, Kenya. The analysts in the command center went to work immediately. Within minutes, a list of cargo ships appeared on the main screen. We have 3 vessels from Mombasa that docked in the tri-state area within the last 36 hours, an analyst reported. 2 are container ships at the port of Newark. 1 is a bulk carrier currently unloading agricultural products at a private terminal along the Hudson River. The agricultural carrier, Elena said instantly. What is the cargo? Raw organic fertilizer and dried bone meal, the analyst replied. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Bone meal is highly porous. It's the perfect medium to conceal vacuum-sealed packages of aerosolized ricin. The organic scent of the fertilizer would easily mask the chemical trace to standard canine units. But not to you, Aiden said, his voice carrying a pride that made her chest warm. Not to me, Elena agreed. The bull carrier is the primary target. We need to move now. We're on our way, Aiden said, turning to his tactical team. Load up. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time the tactical convoy arrived at the private dock along the Hudson River. The terminal was a grim, industrial landscape of rusting cranes, towering piles of gravel, and dilapidated warehouses. The bulk carrier, the Crimson Horizon, lay low in the dark, churning water of the river, its massive cranes unloading giant bags of agricultural fertilizer onto the concrete pier. The CBP Special Tactical Elite Unit, led by Aiden, moved in silence. They wore dark tactical gear, their weapons held at the low ready, their movements coordinated and precise. Elena walked in the center of the formation, protected on all sides. She wore her tactical uniform with a lightweight respirators hung around her neck, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The harbormaster's office was a small, poorly lit prefab building near the main.
Gotta.
Aiden kicked the door open, his rifle leading the way. Federal agents. Nobody.
Move.
The three men inside, two local dock workers, and a man in an expensive, dark raincoat, froze. The man in the raincoat immediately reached for his pocket. But Aiden was faster. He slammed the man against the wall, disarming him of a silenced semi-automatic pistol before he could draw it. Clear, an agent called out. Aiden pulled the man in the raincoat around, forcing him to look at him.
Who
are you? The man remained silent, his expression cold and arrogant. Elena stepped into the room. She didn't need to look at his ID. She inhaled, gently, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the man's leather boots and the cuffs of his trousers. He was on the ship, Elena said. His boots smell of high-grade marine diesel, but there's also the scent of eucalyptus globulus and dry bone meal. He's the courier. The man's eyes flickered with a sudden, sharp fear. He looked at Elena as if she were a ghost. How could you possibly? Search the office, Aiden ordered. Within minutes, an agent found a heavy, reinforced metal briefcase hidden under a desk. Don't touch the lock, Elena warned, stepping forward. She leaned close to the briefcase, her nose inches from the seal. There's a pressurized release valve on the side. If you force the lock, it will vent the contents into the room. Can you bypass it? Aiden asked. Yes, Elena said. She reached into her utility belt and pulled out a small can of specialized fast-freezing liquid nitrogen spray, a standard tool for biochemical disposal teams. If we freeze the valve mechanism, the gas pressure will drop, preventing the emergency vent from triggering. She carefully directed the spray onto the side of the briefcase. A thick layer of white frost immediately covered the metal. Now, she said to the tactical technician, use the hydraulic cutter on the hinges. Avoid the lock entirely. The technician nodded, applying the heavy tool to the frozen hinges.
With a
loud, metallic snap, the hinges sheared off. Aiden carefully lifted the lid. Inside the briefcase, nestled in custom-cut foam, were 6 large, stainless steel cylinders. Each cylinder was equipped with a digital timer and a high-pressure aerosol nozzle. The secondary shipment. Aiden breathed, his face pale under his helmet.
They
were planning to deploy these in the city's main transit hubs during the morning rush hour. The courier, seeing his leverage completely gone, slumped against the wall, his face devoid of color. It's over, he muttered in a foreign accent. Yes, Elena said, looking at him with a calm, unyielding resolve. It is. The federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan was swarming with media 3 months later. The Ricin conspiracy case had captured the national headline. The public was fascinated by the story of Bianca Sterling, the glamorous humanitarian doctor, who was actually a cold-blooded mercenary, and Julian Cole, the arrogant university professor who had destroyed his own life out of sheer vanity. But the most talked-about figure was Elena Sterling, the quiet, mysterious desk clerk who had turned out to be a highly decorated federal asset, whose extraordinary sense of smell had saved the city from a catastrophic biological
disaster.
Elena sat in the witness waiting room, dressed in a sharp, tailored dark gray suit. She looked calm, poised, and beautiful. Aiden walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her, sitting down on the couch beside her. How are you holding up? He asked, his voice filled with a quiet warmth that was reserved only for her. I'm fine, Elena said, taking a sip of the coffee. Just ready to put this last chapter behind me. The prosecution is calling you in 5 minutes, Aiden said. Julian's defense team is going to try to paint him as a victim of Bianca's manipulation. They're going to try to argue that he had no criminal intent. It won't work, Elena said calmly. We have the customs declarations he signed. We have the financial records showing he accepted consulting fees from Bianca's shell company. He might not have known the exact nature of the toxin, but he knew he was bypassing federal security protocols for money and personal
favor.
That's a federal crime. And Bianca? She pled guilty this morning, Aiden replied. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She realized the government had an airtight case, thanks to your forensic profiling of the pathogen. The door opened, and a young assistant district attorney stepped in. Ms. Sterling, we're ready for you. Elena stood up, smoothing her jacket. Aiden stood up with her. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her arm. I'll be right there in the front row. Elena smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I know. The courtroom was packed to capacity when Elena entered. The gallery was filled with journalists, lawyers, and curious onlookers. But Elena's eyes went straight to the defense table. Julian Cole sat there, flanked by 2 high-priced defense attorneys. He looked like a shadow of his former self. He had lost weight, his face was pale and drawn, and his expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. His hair was graying at the temples, and his eyes carried the hollow, desperate look of a man who knew his destiny was sealed. When he saw Elena walk in, his eyes lit up with a sudden, pathetic hope.
He
Half stood from his chair, whispering her name.
Eh?
One of his attorneys quickly grabbed his sleeve and pulled him back down, whispering harshly in his ear. Elena didn't look at him again. She walked straight to the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down. The prosecutor stepped forward. State your name and occupation for the record, please. Elena Sterling, she said, her voice clear and resonant, echoing through the silent courtroom. I am the lead biochemical profiler and senior customs consultant for the Department of Homeland Security, assigned to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. For the next 2 hours, Elena testified. She detailed the events at the airport terminal. She explained how her anomalous olfactory senses had detected the presence of weaponized ricin. She described how Julian Cole had actively obstructed her, physically pushing her and preventing her from securing the suspect's suitcase, leading to a critical delay, and her subsequent physical injury. She presented the forensic chemical evidence, explaining how the pathogens scent profile linked the shipment to the illicit manufacturing facilities in West Africa and East Africa, and how Julian's signature on the customs documents had enabled the smuggling network to operate. Julian's defense attorney stood up to cross-examine her. He tried to be aggressive, but under Elena's calm, precise, and highly technical responses, his arguments crumbled. Ms. Sterling, the defense attorney said, trying a different tactic. Is it not true that you and my client were experiencing severe marital difficulties at the time? Is it not possible that your actions at the airport were motivated, at least in part, by personal jealousy toward Miss Sterling's former associate,
Bianca Sterling?
Elena looked at the attorney, then turned her gaze to the jury. My personal life has no bearing on my federal duties, Elena said, her voice carrying a powerful, quiet dignity. I detected a Class A weaponized biological agent. My training, my duty, and my oath required me to stop that suitcase.
If I
had allowed personal feelings or my husband's obstruction to deter me, hundreds of people in that terminal would be dead today. She turned her head slowly to look at Julian. My husband chose to protect a smuggler because he believed I was insignificant. He chose his own pride over the safety of the public and the life of his own family. She paused, her voice dropping to a calm, devastating whisper. He made his choice. Now he must live with the consequences. In the gallery, several jury members nodded silently. Julian slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. He began to weep, his shoulders shaking, his arrogance completely shattered before the eyes of the world. No further questions, the defense attorney said quietly, realizing he had
lost.
Elena stood up from the witness stand. She walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, her steps firm and confident. She was no longer the shadow of a man's ego. She was Elena Sterling. 6 months later, the cherry blossoms were in full bloom along the Potomac River. In Washington, D.C., Elena stood on the terrace of the Department of Homeland Security headquarters, looking out over the water. The fresh spring air was sweet with the scent of wet earth, blooming flowers, and the clean, crisp breeze of a new season. She had been promoted to director of the new Biochemical Threat Detection Unit, a specialized division created specifically to utilize her training and unique skills to train a new generation of profilers. Behind her, the glass doors slid open. Aiden walked out onto the terrace, carrying 2 files.
He had also been
promoted, now serving as the special agent in charge of the Regional Elite Tactical Division. The final sentencing report for Julian Cole just came in, Aiden said, stepping up to the railing beside her. Elena didn't turn around immediately. She let the warm sun beat down on her
face.
What did he get? 12 years in a federal medium security facility, followed by 5 years of supervised release, Aiden said. His academic credentials have been permanently revoked, and he has been ordered to pay full restitution to the federal government.
Elena nodded slowly.
There was no joy in her heart over his sentence, but there was a profound sense of peace. Julian was no longer a part of her life.
He was
just a footnote in a case file, a lesson learned and left behind. And Bianca? Her appeal was denied, Aiden said, closing the file. She'll spend the rest of her days in a maximum security prison in West Virginia. He placed the files on a small table and stood close to her, looking out over the river. The silence between them was no longer the heavy, tense silence she had shared with Julian. It was a comfortable, warm, and supportive space. You look beautiful today, Elena, Aiden said softly. Elena turned to look at him. His dark eyes were filled with a tenderness that she had never experienced in her life before, a tenderness that was built on mutual respect, shared strength, and a deep, unspoken bond. Thank you, Aiden, she said, for everything, for believing in me when everyone else thought I was just a desk clerk. I always knew who you were, Elena, he said, his hand finding hers on the railing. His fingers slid between hers, warm and solid. You just had to realize it yourself. Elena smiled, looking down at their joined hands. The scent of the spring blossoms was strong, but beneath it, she could smell the clean, reassuring scent of a cedarwood cologne, a scent that, to her, would always mean safety, trust, and a brand new beginning.